Welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to be looking at some of the most famous literature in the entire English language. When you think of William Shakespeare's sonnets, what immediately comes to mind? Probably weddings, Valentine's Day cards, and those flowery declarations of endless devotion, right? But do we truly grasp the depth of his most famous romantic works? Okay, let's dive into this. Because here is the fascinating truth. If you actually look closely at the texts, these are not just your standard flowery wedding poems, not even close. The sonnets are incredibly complex, and occasionally, they are quite dark. If we simply read them as straightforward declarations of modern romantic love, we are literally missing out on the intense psychological and philosophical drama that's playing out right beneath the surface. Think about the absolute stereotypical view of Shakespearean romance, a beautiful woman on a balcony being passionately wooed from below. We often assume the sonnets are just the poetic equivalent of that exact scene, but we need to completely shatter that illusion today. The sonnets are actually filled with deep existential dread, incredibly fluid gender roles, and a scandalous, agonizing love triangle. It's really less Romeo and Juliet and much more like a high-stakes 16th century psychological thriller. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We are going to cover the mechanics of a sonnet, the mysterious cast of characters, battling the ravages of time, gender, lust, and friendship, and finally, the tragic vision of betrayal. Once we master the structural rules of the poetry, I promise you, we will dive deep into the juicy drama and the fascinating philosophy behind the words. Section 1. The mechanics of a sonnet. The rules of the game. Before we can really appreciate the emotional depth of these poems, we kind of have to know how they're built. Writing a sonnet back then was essentially like solving a highly structured puzzle, and knowing the rules is going to give us an immediate sense of mastery. The foundation of this puzzle is the rhythm, specifically called iambic pentameter. This is a meter with 5 iambs per line, and an iamb is simply an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one. Think of it exactly like a human heartbeat. When you read a line of Shakespeare, it naturally sounds like da-dum, 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 da-dum. For example, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? That steady, pulsing rhythm is absolutely crucial because it drives the emotion forward. Now, let's talk about the rhyme scheme. A traditional Shakespearean sonnet has exactly 14 lines, and they're broken down into 3 distinct blocks of 4 lines, which we call quatrains, and a final block of 2 lines called a couplet. The first quatrain rhymes A, B, A, B. For example, if we look at a modern practice poem from our sources called The Cats, the end words rhyme green, white, unseen night. That pattern repeats with new sounds in the second and third quatrains. As the poet moves through these blocks, they're usually building an argument or exploring a specific problem. Finally, the whole thing resolves with a GG couplet, 2 back-to-back rhyming lines that deliver the final and usually quite surprising punchline or conclusion to the whole shebang. Section 2. The mysterious cast of characters, the players in the drama. So, forget the whole idea of a simple romance between a poet and a maiden. These poems actually document a highly dramatic, almost reality TV-style love triangle. Here is our core cast. We have the speaker, who is an older, devoted, and honestly sometimes deeply insecure male figure. The vast majority of the poems are directed at the fair youth, a beautiful, aristocratic young man whom the speaker absolutely adores. Then we have the dark lady, a mysterious woman who tempts the speaker and basically throws his world into total chaos. And finally, there's the rival poet, described as an alien pen, who actively competes for the fair youth's patronage and affection. This complex web of relationships is a far cry from a traditional 2-person romance, isn't it? Now, this naturally brings up a centuries-old question. Were these real people? Scholars have debated this for literally hundreds of years, desperately trying to identify them. Was the fair youth William Herbert, the Earl of Pembroke? Or maybe Henry Wriothesley? Was the dark lady Mary Fitton? Or perhaps Amelia Bassano? While all this historical gossip is definitely fascinating, the truth is that no clear historical identification has ever been definitively proven. But honestly, what matters so much more than their literal historical identities are the intense, universal human truths they represent for all of us today. Section 3. Battling the ravages of time, the existential dread. So, the crucial point is that the greatest enemy in these poems isn't some human villain or a jealous lover. It is time itself. Listen to this beautiful quote from Sonnet 18. And every fair from fair sometime declines. Or consider Sonnet 60, where human life is compared to waves crashing on a rocky shore, just constantly pushing forward to their end. Shakespeare portrays time as an inescapable, totally destructive force. It's this impartial monster that erodes youth, withers beauty, and destroys even the absolute greatest earthly achievements. The speaker is completely consumed by the existential dread of watching the beautiful fair youth inevitably age and pass away. To fight back against this creeping dread, the speaker proposes two very distinct strategies against time. The first strategy, which we see heavily in the early sonnets, is procreation. The speaker essentially begs the fair youth to have children, arguing that biological copy-pasting, passing on his physical beauty to an heir, is the only way to cheat death. But as the sequence progresses, the speaker shifts to a second, much bolder strategy, artistic immortality. He realizes that he can capture the youth's beauty forever in the eternal lines of his poetry. Long after stone monuments crumble into dust and cities fall, the ink on the page is going to survive, keeping the youth alive in the minds of future readers. Section 4. Gender, Lust, and Friendship, the Renaissance Mindset. To truly understand these relationships, we have to step completely out of our modern perspective and place ourselves directly into the mindset of 16th century England. Today, we tend to view gender and sexuality through a modern lens, categorizing them by strict biological and ontological definitions. But the Renaissance view? It was entirely different. They operated on a one-sex model, which actually traced back to ancient Greece, where gender was viewed much more as a social rank based on dominance and submission. Because of this, male homoeroticism and deep homosocial bonds really weren't seen as a moral crisis or a strict identity category. Instead, an older man mentoring and deeply loving a younger man was often considered perfectly normative within their social hierarchy. Now contrast that with how the era viewed male-female relationships outside of marriage. The Dark Lady in the Sonnets perfectly embodies a very specific set of historical fears. As our sources explain, the society of the time harbored deep anxieties about female lust. They were terrified that unbridled passion for a woman could destabilize male self-mastery, totally distract men from their civic and military duties, and risk the creation of illegitimate bloodlines. And that last point was a massive threat to a patriarchal society built entirely on inheritance and clear lineage. This historical context gave rise to what's known as the cult of friendship. This was a Renaissance ideal where pure male homosocial bonds were viewed as morally superior, stabilizing, and ennobling. The speaker's love for the fair youth is constantly framed as a marriage of true minds, a totally rational, pure devotion. Meanwhile, his desire for the Dark Lady, well, that's described as a fever, a literal madness that strips him of all his reason. Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 5, the tragic vision of betrayal, broken ideals. Up to this point, the speaker has placed the fair youth on an impossibly high pedestal, seeing him as the absolutely perfect embodiment of fair, kind, and true. But reality is about to crash in, hard. The fair youth proves to be deeply, deeply flawed. He commits a double betrayal. He actually becomes romantically involved with the speaker's mistress, the Dark Lady, and he starts favoring the rival poet over the speaker. Yet, the speaker writes, "Lascivious grace in whom all ill well shows, kill me with spites, yet we must not be foes." And this brilliantly illustrates the speaker's sheer agony. Even after all that, he forces himself to forgive the youth. It's a heartbreaking realization that even the most idealized, perfect love is entirely subject to human frailty, selfishness, and betrayal. We've seen how time acts as an unstoppable destroyer, and how even the most idealized human relationships are tainted by betrayal and societal anxieties. But all of this leaves us with one final, incredibly profound question. If time destroys all things and humans inevitably betray us, does art truly have the power to make us immortal? Think about it for a second. Over 400 years later, we are sitting here today still breathing life into Shakespeare's verse by exploring his hopes, his fears, and his loves in this very explainer. It seems that, despite all the tragedy and heartbreak, his bold prophecy of artistic immortality was absolutely right. So it leaves us wondering, what legacy will your words leave behind?